I thought I had it all: a loving husband, a fulfilling career, and a perfect life. But one day, everything changed. A new cologne, late nights at the office, hushed phone calls. My world started to crumble around me. I never imagined I'd become a detective in my own marriage. Piecing together clues of betrayal, the woman who trusted unconditionally was gone, replaced by someone desperate for the truth. What would you do if your entire reality was built on lies? I faced my worst nightmare head-on, uncovering a web of deceit that ran deeper than I ever could have imagined. Hotel receipts, secret bank accounts, whispered promises of a new life. Each discovery was another knife to my heart. But this isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a journey of self-discovery, of finding strength I never knew I had. Through tears and sleepless nights, I rebuilt myself from the ground up. They say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But what happens when the person trying to break you is the one you trusted most? This is my story of love, loss, and ultimate triumph. Are you ready to see how far a woman can go when she's pushed to the edge? I never imagined my life would take such a dramatic turn. For 10 years, I thought I had it all: a loving husband, a fulfilling career as a high school teacher, and a cozy home in a quiet suburb. Mark and I seemed like the perfect couple to our friends and family. We talk for hours about our dreams, laugh at inside jokes, and support each other through thick and thin. At least, that's what I believed. I still remember the day we met. I was struggling with a heavy box of books for my classroom when Mark appeared out of nowhere, flashing that charming smile of his. "Need a hand?" he asked, already reaching for the box. From that moment, I was smitten. He was handsome, kind, and had a great sense of humor. Our first date was at a local coffee shop, where we talked until closing time. It felt like I'd known him my whole life. Fast forward to our wedding day, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. Mark looked so handsome in his tux, and when he said, "I do," I truly believed it was forever. We honeymooned in a quaint beach town, spending lazy days on the sand and romantic nights under the stars. Those were some of the happiest days of my life. As the years went by, we settled into a comfortable routine. I'd wake up early to grade papers, and Mark would bring me coffee in bed before heading to his job as a sales manager. We'd meet up for dinner, sharing stories about our day and planning for the future. We talked about having kids, buying a bigger house, and growing old together. Everything seemed perfect. I threw myself into my work, determined to make a difference in my students' lives. There's nothing quite like seeing a kid's face light up when they finally understand a difficult concept. I organized extra tutoring sessions, started a book club, and even coached the debate team. My colleagues often joked that I lived at the school, but I didn't mind. I loved what I did. Mark was supportive of my dedication, or so I thought. He'd surprise me with takeout on late nights and leave sweet notes in my lunchbox. "You're changing lives, babe," he'd say. "I'm so proud of you." Those words meant the world to me. We had our challenges, of course. We argued about silly things like whose turn it was to do the dishes or what movie to watch on date night. But we always made up quickly, usually with a hug and a promise to communicate better. I thought that's what made us strong, our ability to work through problems together. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. The late nights at the office became more frequent. The work trips started lasting longer, but I trusted Mark completely. Why wouldn't I? He was my rock, my partner, my best friend. I remember the last truly happy moment we shared. It was our 10th anniversary, and Mark surprised me with a romantic dinner at home. He'd cooked my favorite meal, with only minor burns to show for it, and even attempted a homemade cake. It was lopsided and the frosting was a mess, but I thought it was perfect. We slow danced in the living room, and as I rested my head on his shoulder, I felt utterly content. "I love you, Sarah," he whispered in my ear. "Here's to 10 more years." If only I'd known then how quickly everything would fall apart. But that night, as we clinked glasses and shared a slice of that imperfect cake, I was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. I was still living in my bubble of happiness, completely oblivious to the betrayal that was about to shatter my world. As I drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in Mark's arms, I had no idea that in just a few short weeks, my life would be turned upside down. The woman who fell asleep feeling loved and secure would soon be replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and ultimately happier. But the journey to get there would be the hardest thing I'd ever face. I first noticed something was off on a Wednesday morning. Mark kissed me goodbye as usual, but there was a scent I didn't recognize. It wasn't unpleasant, just different. I chalked it up to a new cologne and went about my day. That evening, I was grading papers when Mark came home late. "Sorry, babe," he said, giving me a quick peck. "Work's been crazy." I caught a whiff of alcohol on his breath. It wasn't like him to drink on a weeknight, but I didn't think much of it. Everyone deserves to blow off steam sometimes, right? The next morning, I asked about the new cologne. "Oh, that," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Jim from accounting gave it to me, said it was taking up space in his bathroom." I nodded, ignoring the uneasy feeling in my gut. As the days went by, I noticed more little changes. Mark's phone was always face down now. He'd take calls in the other room, his voice low and hushed. When I'd walk in, he'd quickly end the conversation. "Just work stuff," he'd say with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. One night, I woke up to find his side of the bed empty. The clock read 2 a.m. I found him in the living room, furiously typing on his laptop. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered. "Might as well get some work done." He closed the laptop as I approached, and I pretended not to notice. I tried to push my suspicions aside. Mark loved me. We were happy, weren't we? But the doubts kept creeping in, like unwelcome guests at a party. At school, I found it harder to concentrate. My students noticed. "Are you okay, Mrs. Thompson?" Emily, one of my brightest students, asked after class. "You seem distracted." I forced a smile and assured her everything was fine, but it wasn't, not really. I started paying more attention to Mark's schedule. He was coming home later and later, always with the same excuse. "Work's been crazy." When he was home, he was distant, often lost in his phone. Our conversations became surface level, like we were roommates instead of spouses. One evening, I decided to surprise him at his office. I picked up his favorite takeout and headed downtown. But when I arrived, the receptionist looked confused. "Mr. Thompson left hours ago," she said. "Said he had plans with you." My heart sank. I mumbled something about a miscommunication and left, the food growing cold in my hands. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. Where was he? Who was he with? When Mark finally came home that night, I was waiting. "How was dinner?" I asked casually. He froze for a split second before recovering. "Oh, you know, same old work stuff. Jim ordered pizza for the team." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily it made me sick. I wanted to confront him then and there, but fear held me back. What if I was wrong? What if there was a reasonable explanation for everything? I didn't want to accuse him without proof, so I swallowed my suspicions along with the lump in my throat. That night, as Mark slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. How had we gotten here? When did secrets and lies become part of our relationship? I thought about the students I counseled, always encouraging them to trust their instincts. Why couldn't I take my own advice? The next morning, I watched Mark get ready for work. He hummed as he knotted his tie, seemingly without a care in the world. "I might be late again tonight," he said, not even looking at me. "I'm big project due," I nodded, my heart breaking a little more. As he left, I caught another whiff of that unfamiliar cologne. It felt like a slap in the face. I wanted to run after him, to demand answers. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, my untouched coffee growing cold. I thought about calling in sick to school, but I knew I needed the distraction. As I stood in front of my first class of the day, I plastered on a smile. "All right, everyone," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let's dive into today's lesson." But as I spoke about Shakespeare and star-crossed lovers, my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't shake the feeling that my own love story was unraveling, thread by thread. The signs were there, clear as day. I just didn't want to see them. That afternoon, during my free period, I sat alone in my classroom. I stared at my phone, debating whether to call Mark to ask him outright if something was wrong. But what would I say? How do you ask the person you trust most in the world if they're lying to you? I put the phone down, feeling more alone than ever. The woman who had once felt so secure in her marriage now felt like a stranger in her own life. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The real storm was yet to come, and it would test me in ways I never imagined. As the weeks went by, Mark's behavior became more and more suspicious. The late nights at the office turned into drinks with colleagues that I'd never met. He'd come home smelling of alcohol and that unfamiliar cologne, his shirt wrinkled and his eyes avoiding mine. One night, as I was folding laundry, I found a receipt in his pocket. It was for a fancy restaurant downtown, definitely not the kind of place you'd go for a casual work dinner. When I asked him about it, he shrugged it off. Oh, that was for a client meeting. You know how it is in sales. But I did know how it was in sales. Mark had never needed to wine and dine clients before. Something wasn't adding up, and the knot in my stomach grew tighter. I started paying more attention to his phone habits. He was always texting, but I never saw who it was. If I walked into the room while he was on a call, he'd quickly end it or lower his voice. Once, I caught a glimpse of a message notification from someone named Jay, with a heart emoji. When I asked who it was, he snatched the phone away. Just a new coworker, he muttered. The tension in our house was palpable. We barely talked anymore, and when we did, it was surface-level stuff. How was your day? Fine. What's for dinner? Whatever. It was like we were reading from a script, going through the motions of a marriage without any of the substance. I tried to talk to him about it one night. Mark, I said, my voice shaking. Is everything okay? You seem distant lately. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Was it guilt? Annoyance? Everything's fine, Sarah, he said. Work's just been stressful. You're overthinking things. But was I? The doubts were consuming me. I couldn't focus at school, and my students were starting to notice. Mrs. Thompson, are you sure you're okay? Emily asked again after class. This time, I couldn't hold back the tears. I quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. It's just allergies, I lied, hating myself for setting such a poor example. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with possibilities. Was Mark having an affair? Was our marriage over? Had I done something wrong? As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I made a decision. I needed to know the truth, one way or another. The next day, while Mark was at work, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through his things. I felt dirty, like I was violating his privacy, but I needed answers. I searched his dresser, his closet, even under the mattress. Nothing. Then I remembered his old laptop in the spare room. He rarely used it anymore, preferring his work computer. With shaking hands, I opened it. The battery was dead, so I plugged it in and waited for what felt like hours for it to boot up. When the screen finally flickered to life, I hesitated. Did I really want to do this? But I'd come too far to turn back now. I clicked on his email, holding my breath. Most of it was work-related or junk. But then I saw it, an email from Jessica, with the subject line, "Can't wait to see you again." My heart pounding, I clicked on it. The message was brief, but it confirmed my worst fears. Last night was amazing. I miss you already. Same time next week? I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I read the email over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood. But there it was, in black and white. Mark was cheating on me. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen. Tears streamed down my face, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was how our entire life together had been a lie. When I heard Mark's car pull into the driveway, I quickly closed the laptop and wiped my eyes. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. I needed time to process, to figure out what to do next. That night, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I looked at Mark, really looked at him. He was handsome as ever, but now I saw the deceit behind his eyes. How had I missed it for so long? "How was your day?" he asked, not looking up from his plate. I wanted to scream, to throw my plate at him, to demand answers. Instead, I heard myself say, "Fine, just another day." As I lay in bed that night, Mark snoring softly beside me, I felt more alone than ever. The man I had loved, trusted, built a life with was a stranger to me now, and I had no idea what to do next. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of my journey. The pain was raw, the betrayal deep, but somewhere inside me, a spark of determination was igniting. I might be down, but I wasn't out, not by a long shot. The road ahead would be tough, but I was tougher. And Mark? He had no idea what was coming. I couldn't sleep that night, my mind racing with questions. How long had this been going on? Who was Jessica? What did she have that I didn't? As the first rays of sunlight peeked through the curtains, I made a decision. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. The next morning, I waited until Mark left for work before starting my investigation. I felt like a character in one of those crime shows we used to watch together. Funny how life imitates art sometimes. First stop, social media. I logged into Mark's Facebook account. We'd always known each other's passwords. A sign of trust that now felt like a cruel joke. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first glance. Then I noticed he'd recently changed his privacy settings. Suspicious much. I scrolled through his friends list looking for anyone named Jessica. There were 3. One was his cousin, so that was out. The second was a woman in her 60s, unlikely. The third, my heart stopped. Jessica Adams, 28, worked at Mark's company. Her profile picture showed a stunning blonde with a megawatt smile. I felt sick. I clicked on her profile, but most of it was private. I could only see a few photos and posts. Nothing incriminating, but nothing reassuring either. I made a mental note of her name and moved on. Next, I checked Mark's browser history on our shared computer. Most of it had been cleared, another red flag. But he'd forgotten to clear his Google search history. Best hotels for discreet meetings, how to hide text messages on signs your wife suspects cheating. Each search felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I needed more concrete evidence. With shaking hands, I picked up Mark's phone. He'd changed the passcode recently, but I knew him well enough to guess it on the 3rd try. Our anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I scrolled through his messages, my worst fears were confirmed. There were dozens of texts from Jay, all flirty, some explicit. I felt dizzy reading them, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know everything. One message caught my eye. "Can't wait for our weekend getaway. These business trips are the best cover." So that's where he'd been going all those times. My hands shook with anger as I took screenshots of the messages. I was about to put the phone down when it buzzed with a new message from Jay. "Missing you already." I logged into our joint bank account and started going through the transactions. There it was, charges for fancy restaurants, hotel rooms, jewelry stores, all on days when Mark had claimed to be working late or out of town. As the evidence piled up, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, of course, heartbreak, but also a growing sense of determination. I'd been played for a fool, but no more. It was time to take control of the situation. I spent the rest of the day gathering every bit of evidence I could find. I printed out bank statements, saved screenshots, even recorded the voicemail greeting on the secret phone I'd found hidden in Mark's gym bag. By the time I heard his car pull into the driveway that evening, I had a folder full of proof. For a moment, I considered confronting him right then and there, but something held me back. I needed time to process all of this, to figure out my next move, So I hid the folder, put on my best poker face, and greeted him as if nothing had changed. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Same old, he replied, not meeting my eyes. "How about you?" "Oh, you know," I said, fighting to keep my tone neutral. "Just another day." As we went through the motions of our evening routine, dinner, dishes, mindless TV, I felt like I was watching a play. None of this was real. The man sitting next to me, the one I'd loved for so long, was a stranger. That night, as Mark slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the life we'd built together, the dreams we'd shared, all of it based on lies. The pain was almost unbearable, but beneath it, I felt something else stirring. Anger, determination, a fierce resolve to not let this break me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I deserved better than this, and I was going to fight for myself no matter what it took. As the first light of dawn crept into our bedroom, I made a silent promise to myself. This was not the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, and in this chapter, I was going to be the hero of my own life. The next few days were a blur of emotions and secret investigations. I felt like I was living a double life, dutiful wife by night, amateur detective by day. Every moment Mark was out of the house, I was digging deeper, trying to uncover the full extent of his betrayal. I started with his colleagues. Under the guise of planning a surprise party for Mark, I reached out to a few of them. "Hey, it's Sarah, Mark's wife," I'd say, my voice cheerful despite the churning in my stomach. "I'm trying to organize a little get-together for his birthday. Has he mentioned any plans?" Most of them seemed genuinely surprised. "Birthday plans? He hasn't said anything," was the common response. One of them, Tom, hesitated before adding, "To be honest, Sarah, we haven't seen much of Mark outside of meetings lately. He's always rushing off somewhere." That somewhere was becoming clearer with each passing day. I'd found hotel receipts, dinner bills for two at romantic restaurants, even a charge for a weekend spa getaway, all on days when Mark had claimed to be working late or on business trips. I wanted concrete proof, something undeniable. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. The decision didn't come easily. It felt like a violation of trust, but then again, hadn't Mark already shattered that trust? Meeting the investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, was surreal. "I've seen this 100 times, she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "Don't worry, we'll get you the evidence you need." For a week, Linda tailed Mark. Each day, she'd send me updates, photos of him entering office buildings, grabbing coffee, nothing out of the ordinary. I started to wonder if I was overreacting, if maybe all of this was just a big misunderstanding. Then, on a Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Linda. "Check your email, now." With shaking hands, I opened the attached photos. There was Mark, walking hand in hand with a blonde woman into a hotel. The timestamp showed it was during his supposed late meeting at the office. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Seeing it in black and white, the undeniable proof of his infidelity, was devastating. I spent the next hour crying in the bathroom, trying to muffle my sobs so the neighbors wouldn't hear. When I finally emerged, red-eyed and exhausted, I had a moment of clarity. I needed more than just photos. I needed to understand the full scope of this affair. How long had it been going on? Was she the only one? What were his intentions? I decided to take a risk. Using the burner phone I'd found in Mark's gym bag, I texted Jessica. "Hey babe, thinking of leaving Sarah, what do you think?" The response came quickly. "About time. I'm tired of being your dirty little secret. Let's start our life together already." My world shattered all over again. This wasn't just a fling. Mark was planning to leave me. How long had he been plotting this? How much of our life together had been a lie? In a daze, I went through our home office, looking for any financial documents I might have missed. That's when I found it, a lease agreement for an apartment across town starting next month. He'd already put down a deposit. The evidence was overwhelming, but somehow, I still felt like I was missing something. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to confront the reality of Mark's betrayal head-on. So I made a decision. The next time Mark said he had a late meeting, I'd follow him myself. No more hiding behind investigators or anonymous text messages. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As I lay in bed that night, Mark snoring softly beside me, I felt a strange calm come over me. The woman who had started this investigation, scared, insecure, desperate for answers, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone determined to uncover the truth and take control of her life. I didn't know what the next day would bring, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being a victim. Whatever happened next, I'd face it head-on with my eyes wide open. Little did I know the real test of my strength was yet to come. The next 24 hours would change everything, pushing me to my limits and forcing me to confront truths I never thought I'd have to face. But in that moment, as I drifted off to sleep, I felt ready for whatever lay ahead. The old Sarah might have been broken by this betrayal, but the new Sarah, she was just getting started. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. Today was the day I'd see Mark's betrayal with my own eyes. No more secondhand information or blurry photos. I needed to witness it myself. As Mark kissed me goodbye, I felt a surge of anger. How dare he act so normal, so loving, when he was about to go meet her. "Have a great day, honey," I said, my voice sickly sweet. "Don't work too hard." He smiled, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I sprang into action. I'd taken the day off work, telling my principal I had a family emergency. In a way, I suppose I did. I grabbed my go bag, a change of clothes, some cash, and a fully charged phone. Then I hopped into my car and followed Mark at a safe distance. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. He drove to his office building, just like any other day. For a moment, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Maybe he really was just going to work. But then I remembered the text messages, the hotel receipts, the apartment lease. No, this was no mistake. I parked across the street and settled in for a long wait. Hours ticked by. I was starting to get restless when suddenly, Mark emerged from the building. He looked around furtively before heading to his car. This was it. I followed him through the city, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. He pulled into the parking lot of a swanky hotel, the same one from the investigators' photos. I watched as he walked in, looking over his shoulder one last time before disappearing through the revolving doors. Now what? I sat in my car, paralyzed with indecision. Should I go in, confront them? The thought made me sick to my stomach, but I'd come this far, I couldn't back down now. With shaking legs, I made my way into the hotel lobby. I approached the front desk, my mind racing to come up with a plan. "Hi," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm supposed to meet my husband for lunch, but I forgot which room he's in. Could you help me?" The receptionist looked skeptical. "Name: Thompson. Mark Thompson." She typed something into her computer, then frowned. "I'm sorry, we don't have anyone by that name checked in." Of course, he wouldn't use his real name. I was about to leave when I heard a familiar laugh. I turned to see Mark stepping out of the elevator, his arm around a stunning blonde. Jessica, I presumed. They were so engrossed in each other they didn't even notice me. I followed them at a distance, my heart in my throat. They made their way to the hotel restaurant, taking a secluded booth in the back. I slipped into a seat at the bar, angling myself so I could see them, but they couldn't see me. Watching them together was surreal. Mark looked happier than I'd seen him in months. He laughed at her jokes, touched her hand across the table, gazed at her with an adoration that used to be reserved for me. It was like watching a stranger wearing my husband's face. I ordered a drink, needing something to steady my nerves. As I sipped my gin and tonic, I overheard snippets of their conversation. "Can't wait to start our life together," Mark was saying. "Just a little longer, babe, I promise." Jessica pouted playfully. "But I'm tired of sneaking around. When are you going to tell her?" "Soon," Mark replied. "I'm just waiting for the right moment. You know how Sarah can be. I need to handle this delicately." Rage boiled up inside me. Handle this delicately, like I was some fragile object to be managed. I wanted to storm over there, to throw my drink in his face, to scream and cry and make a scene. But something held me back. A small, calm voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Not yet, wait." So I sat there, nursing my drink, watching the love of my life plan a future with another woman. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every laugh, every touch, every loving glance was like a knife to my heart. After what felt like hours, they finally got up to leave. I ducked behind a potted plant, watching as they made their way back to the elevator. Just before the doors closed, I saw Mark pull Jessica into a passionate kiss. I stumbled out of the hotel, gasping for air. The bright sunlight felt harsh after the dim interior. I made it to my car before the tears started falling. I cried like I'd never cried before, great heaving sobs that shook my whole body. When the tears finally subsided, I felt empty, hollow. But beneath that emptiness, a spark of anger was growing. How dare he do this to me? How dare he throw away our years together like they meant nothing? As I drove home, my mind was racing. I had decisions to make, big ones. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let Mark Thompson destroy me. He might have broken my heart, but he hadn't broken my spirit. I pulled into our driveway, my resolve strengthening with each passing moment. The old Sarah might have been content to play the victim, to beg Mark to come back, to blame herself for his infidelity, but not anymore. That Sarah was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who refused to be anyone's second choice, a woman who was ready to fight for herself, no matter the cost. Mark had no idea what was coming, but he was about to find out. I spent the next few days in a haze, going through the motions of my daily life, while my mind raced with plans and possibilities. I'd see Mark off to work each morning, playing the role of the unsuspecting wife, all while my insides churned with a mix of anger, hurt, and determination. At school, I struggled to keep it together. My students, perceptive as always, noticed something was off. "Mrs. Thompson, are you okay?" Emily asked after class one day. "You seem different." I forced a smile, assuring her everything was fine. But inside, I was falling apart. That night, as Mark slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. How many nights had he lain here thinking about her? How many times had he kissed me goodbye, only to rush into her arms? The thoughts were torture, but I couldn't stop them. I knew I needed concrete evidence if I was going to confront Mark. The photos from the private investigator were a start, but I wanted more. I wanted to understand the full extent of his betrayal. The next day, while Mark was at work, I decided to do a deep dive into our finances. I spread bank statements, credit card bills, and tax returns across the dining room table. As I pored over the documents, a pattern began to emerge. There were regular withdrawals from our joint account, always in cash, always on Fridays. The amounts varied, but they were substantial. How had I not noticed this before? I'd always trusted Mark to handle our finances, never questioning his decisions. Now, I was kicking myself for my naivety. I dug deeper, cross-referencing the withdrawals with Mark's supposed business trips. They lined up perfectly. My stomach churned as I realized just how long this had been going on. Months, maybe even years. But the real shock came when I stumbled upon a hidden bank account. It was in Mark's name only, and it contained a significant amount of money. Money that should have been part of our shared savings. Money that he'd been secretly squirreling away, presumably for his new life with Jessica. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't just an affair. This was calculated, long-term deception. Mark hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd been systematically dismantling our entire life together. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The last shred of hope I'd been clinging to, that maybe this was all a misunderstanding, that Mark would come to his senses and choose me, evaporated. I was done being the victim. It was time to take control. With shaking hands, I gathered all the evidence I'd collected. The bank statements, the private investigator's photos, the text messages I'd screenshot from Mark's phone. I organized everything into a folder, building a case that even the most skeptical judge couldn't ignore. As I worked, a plan began to form in my mind. I wasn't just going to confront Mark. I was going to blindside him, just like he'd blindsided me with his betrayal. I was going to take back my life on my terms. I called my best friend, Lisa, and asked if I could stay with her for a few days. "Of course," she said, concern evident in her voice. "Sarah, what's going on? Are you okay?" I took a deep breath. "No, I'm not okay, but I will be. I'll explain everything soon. I promise." Next, I called a divorce lawyer. The receptionist offered me an appointment for next week, but I insisted on seeing someone today. "It's urgent," I said, my voice cracking. They must have heard the desperation in my tone because they squeezed me in for a late afternoon appointment. As I packed a bag with enough clothes for a few days, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For weeks, I'd been drowning in uncertainty and pain. But now, with a plan in motion, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I left a note for Mark on the kitchen counter. "We need to talk. Be home by 7 p.m. It's important." Short, simple, and guaranteed to make him sweat. The meeting with the lawyer was a blur of legal jargon and strategic planning. But one thing stood out clearly. With the evidence I'd gathered, I was in a strong position. Mark's deception would cost him dearly. As I drove home, my mind raced with all the things I wanted to say to Mark. I'd imagined this confrontation 100 times, but now that it was actually happening, I felt oddly detached. The pain was still there, but it was overshadowed by a steely resolve. I pulled into our driveway at 6:55 p.m. Mark's car was already there. Good. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. This was it, the moment of truth. As I walked into our house, the home we'd built together, the home he'd been planning to abandon, I felt a shift inside me. The scared, betrayed woman who had first suspected Mark's infidelity was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who refused to be a victim. Mark was waiting in the living room, his face a mask of concern. "Sarah, what's going on? Your note scared me." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in weeks. The man I'd loved, the man I'd built my life around, the man who'd betrayed me in the worst possible way. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I needed to do. "Sit down, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "We need to talk about Jessica." The color drained from Mark's face at the mention of Jessica's name. "Sarah, I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but the panic in his eyes told me everything. "Don't lie to me, Mark, not anymore," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I pulled out the folder of evidence and placed it on the coffee table between us. I know everything." Mark's eyes darted between me and the folder, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I almost pitied him. Almost. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been seeing her?" Mark slumped in his chair, defeat written all over his face. 6 months, he admitted. "But Sarah, it's not what you think." "Not what I think," I interrupted, my voice rising. "So you haven't been lying to me for months. You haven't been sneaking around, spending our money on hotel rooms and fancy dinners. You haven't been planning to leave me." His head snapped up at that last part. "How did you—" "I know everything, Mark," I repeated, opening the folder. I pulled out bank statements, credit card bills, the lease agreement for his new apartment. With each piece of evidence I laid out, I saw Mark shrink further into himself. "I trusted you," I said, my voice breaking. "I gave you everything, my love, my trust, my whole life. And this is how you repay me." Mark leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "Sarah, please, I never meant to hurt you. It just happened. Jessica and I, we connected in a way that—" "Don't you dare." I cut him off, anger flaring hot in my chest. "Don't you dare try to justify this. There is no excuse for what you've done." I stood up, pacing the room as years of pent-up emotions poured out of me. "Do you have any idea what this has done to me? I've been questioning my sanity for weeks. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I thought I was losing my mind. And all this time, you were just living your life like nothing was wrong." Mark stood up, reaching for me. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to go this far. We can work this out. We can go to counseling, start over." I jerked away from his touch. "Start over? Are you kidding me? There's no starting over from this, Mark. You've destroyed everything we had." I pulled out the final piece of evidence, the photos of him and Jessica at the hotel. Mark's face crumpled as he saw them. "How did you get these?" "Does it matter?" I asked. "The point is, I know the truth now, all of it." Mark sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. "What do you want from me, Sarah?" I laughed, a hollow sound that didn't even sound like me. "What do I want? I want the last 10 years of my life back. I want to unknow all of this. I want to go back to being the woman who trusted her husband completely." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what came next. "But since I can't have any of that, I'll settle for a divorce." Mark's head snapped up. "Divorce? Sarah? No. We can fix this. I'll end things with Jessica. I swear. Just give me another chance." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. "There are no more chances, Mark. You've used them all up. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll be hearing from them soon." Mark stood up, his face a mix of anger and desperation. "You can't do this, Sarah. We have a life together, a home. What about our plans for the future?" "Our plans?" I scoffed. "You mean the plans you were making with Jessica? The apartment you leased? The money you've been hiding from me? Those plans?" Mark fell silent, the fight draining out of him. I watched as the reality of the situation sank in. This was really happening. Our marriage was over. "I'll be staying with Lisa for a few days," I said, my voice steady. "When I come back, I expect you to be gone. Take whatever you need, but don't you dare touch our joint accounts. My lawyer will be in touch about dividing our assets." I picked up my bag, already packed and waiting by the door. As I reached for the doorknob, Mark's voice stopped me. "Sarah, wait. I do love you. I know you might not believe that right now, but it's true." I turned to look at him one last time. The man I had loved for so long, the man who had shattered my world. In that moment, I felt nothing but pity for him. "You know what, Mark? I believe you do love me in your way, but love isn't enough, not anymore." With that, I walked out the door, leaving behind the life I had known and stepping into an uncertain future. As I drove to Lisa's house, tears streaming down my face, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to untangle. Grief for the marriage I had lost, anger at Mark's betrayal, fear of what lay ahead. But beneath it all, there was something else, a tiny spark of hope. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of suspicion and doubt was gone, replaced by the certainty of knowing the truth, no matter how painful. As I pulled up to Lisa's house, I took a deep breath. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. And although I didn't know what the future held, I knew one thing for certain. I was strong enough to face it. The first few days at Lisa's were a blur of tears, anger, and sleepless nights. I'd wake up in the unfamiliar guest room, momentarily forgetting why I was there, only to have reality come crashing back down. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. Lisa was a godsend during this time. She listened without judgment, brought me cups of tea I never drank, and gave me space when I needed it. "You're stronger than you know, Sarah," she'd tell me. I wanted to believe her, but most days I felt like I was barely holding it together. One morning, about a week after I'd left Mark, I woke up feeling different. The pain was still there, a constant ache in my chest. But alongside it was something new: determination. I was tired of crying, tired of feeling sorry for myself. It was time to start rebuilding my life. I started small. I went back to work, throwing myself into my teaching with renewed vigor. My students, bless them, seemed to sense that something was off, but they responded to my enthusiasm with their own, helping them learn. Seeing their faces light up with understanding, it reminded me that there was still good in the world, but the nights were still hard. I'd lie awake, replaying every moment of my marriage, wondering how I'd missed the signs. Was I really that blind? Or had Mark just been that good at deceiving me? The questions would swirl in my mind, keeping me up until the early hours of the morning. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I had an idea. If I couldn't sleep, I might as well be productive. I opened my laptop and started researching divorce laws, financial planning for single women, self-help books on recovering from infidelity. I absorbed it all like a sponge. As the weeks went by, I slowly started to feel more like myself. I joined a support group for people going through divorce. Hearing others' stories made me realize I wasn't alone. There was comfort in that, and strength too. I also started seeing a therapist. Dr. Chen was kind but firm, pushing me to confront the hard truths I'd been avoiding. "You're not responsible for Mark's actions," she'd remind me. "His choices are his own." It took time, but I slowly started to believe her. One day, about 2 months after I'd left Mark, I decided it was time to go back to my house. Lisa offered to come with me, but I knew this was something I had to do alone. Walking through the front door was like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, yet it all felt different, foreign. I wandered from room to room, memories assaulting me at every turn. Our wedding photo on the mantle, the kitchen where we'd cooked countless meals together, the bedroom where I shook my head, forcing the thoughts away. This was my home now, and I was going to reclaim it. Over the next few days, I threw myself into redecorating. I painted the walls, rearranged furniture, and donated anything that reminded me too much of Mark. It was cathartic, like I was physically erasing his presence from my life. As I was clearing out the closet, I found a box of old journals. I'd kept them religiously during the early years of our marriage, but had fallen out of the habit. On a whim, I opened one and started reading. The woman in those pages was so full of hope, so in love. I barely recognized her. But as I read on, I saw glimpses of myself, my passion for teaching, my dreams for the future. Those things hadn't died with my marriage. They were still a part of me. Inspired, I bought a new journal and started writing again. At first, it was just a way to process my emotions. But soon, I found myself writing about other things: my hopes, my fears, my plans for the future. It was like rediscovering a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, I threw myself into self-improvement. I joined a gym, started eating healthier, and even took a coding class at the local community college. Anything to keep my mind occupied and moving forward. Mark tried to contact me a few times, pleading voicemails, apologetic emails. Each one was like a knife to the heart, reopening wounds that had barely started to heal. But with each message, my resolve strengthened. I deserved better than this. I deserved better than him. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. Really looked at myself for the first time in months. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same one who had left Mark that night. She was stronger, wiser, with a glint of determination in her eyes. I smiled at my reflection, feeling a surge of pride. I'd been through hell, but I was still standing. More than that, I was thriving. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. But for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt ready to face it. As I crawled into bed that night, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The pain wasn't gone. I knew it would take time for those wounds to fully heal. But alongside the pain was something else. Hope. Hope for the future, hope for new beginnings. I closed my eyes, feeling truly relaxed for the first time in months. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and I was ready for whatever it might bring. As the months passed, I felt like I was finally coming into my own. The divorce proceedings were nearing their end, and with each passing day, I felt lighter, freer. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when the pain would hit me out of nowhere, leaving me gasping for air. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. One sunny Saturday morning, I was sorting through some old boxes in the attic when I came across a dusty photo album. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside were pictures from the early days of my relationship with Mark, our first vacation together, the day we moved into our house, our wedding. I expected to feel that familiar ache in my chest, but instead, I felt nothing. Well, not nothing exactly. I felt a kind of wistful nostalgia, like looking at pictures from a past life. These memories were a part of me, but they no longer had the power to hurt me. As I flipped through the pages, my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Turn on the news," it read. Curious, I made my way downstairs and switched on the TV. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Mark's company was all over the headlines, embroiled in a massive scandal. Apparently, some anonymous whistleblower had sent evidence of widespread fraud and embezzlement to the authorities. The CEO had been arrested, and several high-ranking executives, including Mark, were under investigation. My head was spinning. I knew immediately who the whistleblower was. It had to be Jessica. She must have had access to sensitive information through Mark. Part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, was real. I watched the news coverage for hours, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. I should have felt vindicated, maybe even happy, but all I felt was a profound sense of sadness. Not for Mark, he was reaping what he'd sown. No, I was sad for the woman I used to be, the one who had loved him unconditionally, never suspecting the depths of his deception. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Reporters camped outside my house, hoping for a statement from the wronged wife. My lawyer advised me to stay quiet, which suited me just fine. I had nothing to say to the media vultures. Mark tried to contact me several times, leaving desperate voicemails begging for my help. "Sarah, please?" His voice cracked over the phone. "I'm facing jail time. I need you." Each message felt like a punch to the gut, but I stood firm. His problems were no longer my concern. As the investigation unfolded, more and more details came to light. The scale of the fraud was staggering. Mark and his colleagues had been siphoning off millions of dollars for years. I was horrified to realize that our comfortable lifestyle had been built on stolen money. The final nail in the coffin came when my lawyer called with news. "Sarah," he said, his voice unusually gentle, "there's something you need to know. We've discovered that Mark had been planning to leave the country with Jessica. They had tickets booked for next month." I sat in stunned silence, the phone slipping from my grasp. All this time, while I'd been rebuilding my life, Mark had been planning his escape. With her, the betrayal felt fresh all over again. But as the initial shock wore off, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Relief that I'd discovered the truth when I did. Relief that I'd had the strength to walk away. Relief that I was no longer tied to a man capable of such deception. The day of the final divorce hearing arrived. As I walked into the courthouse, head held high, I caught sight of Mark being led in by his lawyer. He looked terrible, gaunt, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw a flicker of something. Regret? Longing? I couldn't tell, and frankly, I didn't care. The proceedings were mercifully short. Given the circumstances of our separation and Mark's legal troubles, The judge was sympathetic to my case. I was awarded a fair settlement, including the house and a portion of our savings that hadn't been tainted by Mark's illegal activities. As I left the courthouse, officially a divorced woman, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. Really, truly over. That night, I invited Lisa and a few close friends over for dinner. As we sat around my dining room table, laughing and sharing stories, I looked around at the faces of the people who had stood by me through this ordeal. These were the relationships that mattered, built on trust, mutual respect, and genuine love. Later, as I got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was stronger than I ever thought possible. She had faced her worst nightmare and come out the other side, not just surviving, but thriving. I climbed into bed, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. Tomorrow was a new day, the first day of the rest of my life. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what it would bring. As I drifted off to sleep, a small smile played on my lips. Mark had tried to break me, but he'd failed. In trying to destroy me, he'd only made me stronger. And now, as he faced the consequences of his actions, I was free to live my life on my own terms. The road ahead might not be easy, but I was ready for whatever challenges it might bring. Because now I knew the truth. I was capable of so much more than I'd ever imagined. And that was a beautiful thing.